I think that I will not be the most bearish person you will hear on the economy, but you will probably not think I was the prince of lightness and softness either. It is hard right now to not think that we are going to have a bit of a tough time coming. That doesn't mean that I am in that camp of those who think, you know, what George Soros said is going to be the worst financial devastation in 60 years, etc. But I do feel that I have been following a certain logic in the economy for the last several years, and I feel, this is not always the case, but I feel that my instincts have been largely right, and I feel like we're at the point where some of those are going to play out. And I think you have to start, I mean, I just came back from Davos, and on the opening sessions, they had maybe 300 economic people ask, you know, what did you think was the greatest threat in the global economy? And pretty much first place was the U.S. consumer. You start with the notion that in the recession, the consumers were rather amazing. You're supposed to, in a recession like in 2001, pull back on big ticket items. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be, maybe you still go to dinner, but you don't buy that new car or season tickets to the ball game if you're unsure about the future. And yet people bought cars and houses at near record levels. Right, what you would like the interpretation of this to be was that the productivity boom, doubling of productivity that started in the second half of the 90s, and had been leading to rising wages pretty much across the board, had continued in this 2001 to 2007 period. The problem is only half of that story is true. The good news is that productivity not only continued, but you even had a few years around, I think, 03, 04, 05, where productivity was even at a stronger rate than it had been in the second half of the 90s. But the downside was that you were not seeing the wage growth across the board. In fact, wage growth was terribly flat. You look at December 2007, the typical wage is $17.71. That's exactly 2 cents, $17.71, that's exactly 2 cents higher than 5 years earlier that month. So, you know, I used to say that if you just took out 3 very key statistics over the last few years, you would say income has been flat. You would say private savings in 05 and 06 went to almost negative, but about 0.05, 0.06. Those were the lowest private savings our country had had since 1933 at the Great Depression. And household debt service as a percentage of income, near record high, and as an amount, household debt was actually higher than disposable income for the first time on record. Now, if I just told you those statistics, you would say America must be caught in the middle of a very deep recession, and people are borrowing to make up for their, for their income not staying up, and that we were really in the middle of dark times. And yet, those statistics existed when that was not the case. Those statistics existed as we had growth that was well over 3%, and consumer spending that was well over 3%. And so, you have to kind of ask, where was that spending coming from? And I think the answer is pretty clear. The spending was coming from people's perceived increase in their housing wealth. But what that means to me is that our progress, our growth, was just enormously dependent on home prices staying that strong. Now, without going through everything, we all know the story, but just an example, the typical home has gone down from $217,000 in November of 06 to $210,000 in 07. So I mean, we're not just not growing at 10%. We're not even just flat. We're actually seeing home prices decline. It's hard to think that we're at that level right now when the average inventory of existing homes over the last 3 to 4 months has been 10.2 months. Consider in 2005 it was averaging 4.5 months. So there are twice as much existing homes on the market with for sale signs at this period of economic weakness. I mean, you know, basic laws of supply and demand does not paint a pretty picture for the home price situation turning around quickly. Mortgage equity withdrawal. Mortgage equity withdrawal was 1% of GDP in 96 or 97. By 06, it was 8%. I mean, that's not just like another one of 100 statistics somebody like me comes up and puts on the screen. 1% to 8%. That is a huge deal. If now we have lower home prices, people feeling less wealthy, we have credit constraints, it's hard to extract more equity from your home when most banks are assuming your home's value have gone down. If you pull out this huge driver of consumer spending at this time, it's hard for me to believe that the effect is not going to be broader. So when we're talking about housing this time around, we're not talking about it because it's this percentage of the economy or commercial real estate is this percentage. We're talking about it because it may be the most significant thing that impacts consumer spending.